We recently told you about a really good bill in Washington state that would make great change to shape the healthcare of minor children in the state of Washington. It's House Bill 1176, and it is sponsored by State Representative Jim Walsh. I know the odds of this bill getting a hearing in Washington this year are really small, but we want to do everything that we can to protect minor children in Washington state. And so we're going to keep getting the word out on this bill and getting citizens to speak up. So I have a special treat for you today. Jim Walsh joined me to talk directly about his bill and why he's filed it. I hope you enjoy our conversation and learn a lot more about this bill so that you can take action and that you can share this information with other people. Thanks for joining me again and always being willing to have these conversations and always saying yes when I ask. Really excited about this bill that you have pre-filed, House Bill 1176. And I know this isn't the first time that you filed it. And I know this is this is probably my personal top issue. This bill would really correct a big problem in Washington state. Can you tell people essentially what this bill does?
Sure. It is the latest version of a bill that I've filed a couple of times, and it has gotten some support in the legislature, but not enough to get to the governor's desk yet. So it's a little bit. It's essentially the same bill as the other ones, but we've improved it, cleaned up some language, made it tighter. You always try to shorten bills. Like some of these bills get pretty long. It's always a good idea to make it as elegant. That means as succinct as it can be. And so we made this one a little more like that, which is a good thing. It's a better drafted bill, I think. Basically, what House Bill 1176 does is it reforms Washington State's so-called mature minor doctrine. And this doctrine is not a single section of law. It's a number of sections of law that have developed over the last 20 years. It was not one bill turned into law. It was a series, a sequence of bills that bit by bit changed parental rights, changed healthcare policy, changed mental health care policy in the state of Washington. The thing to know about the mature minor doctrine is this is the thing that says a mature minor is a minor child as young as 13 or 14 years old who under the law in Washington can receive health care or mental health care services without the permission or consent of that minor child's parents or legal guardians or family members. It is bad law. It's bad policy. I think it is destructive of healthy families in Washington. I think it has deeper cultural significance than even the letter of the law. I believe it is an attempt by radical legislators who have a disregard for healthy families to put into law and put into practice law that will undermine parental rights and destabilize families. And I believe it is as bad as that. Now, the supporters of this bad idea are deeply invested in partisan rhetoric that the bad doctrine is there to protect children. But it doesn't protect children. By most metrics, the health of teenagers in Washington state has gotten worse over the last 20 years. Incidents of substance use disorder, that is drug addiction, have gotten worse for teenagers. Suicides and suicidal ideation has gotten worse for teenagers in Washington state. And their overall health, things like morbid obesity and type 2, not type 1 diabetes have gotten worse for teenagers. So the metrics have gotten worse. and so we need to do something. What House Bill 1176 does is it changes the law right now, which is a patchwork of these so-called threshold ages at which a child can receive healthcare or mental health care services without parental consent. Right now, it's a patchwork. Some, depending on the specific type of healthcare or mental health care in question, the threshold age starts at 13 in some cases, 14 in some cases, 15 in some cases. What the bill does, it says, no, we're going to make a consistent threshold age, and that age is 17 across the board. A 17-year-old can receive these healthcare services without parental consent. But 16 and younger, you have to have the provider, the healthcare provider has to have parental consent to give any kind of healthcare, therapy, or service to a child. I believe it cleans up the law. The patchwork of different threshold ages doesn't make any sense.
Right.
And I think it does help kids, because I think that this experiment we've had for 20 years in Washington of letting 13-year-olds make their own decisions about psychotherapy or physical health therapies has failed. There's a major difference, and I raised 5 kids to adulthood. There's a major difference between a 13-year-old and a 17-year-old. The same person as a 13-year-old and a 17-year-old is wildly different. The amount of learning, the amount of maturing, the amount of wisdom and good judgment and discernment that a person develops between the age of 13 and 17 is huge. And I think that the bill, a good reform to a bad law, recognizes that big difference.
Yeah, I think it does too, and I wholeheartedly agree with you. There's a huge difference between 13 and 17, and especially that mental health component. When you have a kiddo that's going through a mental health crisis, not only are they just not mature enough to make those decisions, but they're in mental health crisis. They need the protection of their parents.
By definition,
and so, this, I know this isn't one of the feedback that I've gotten since I pushed this out on social media yesterday. And some people are like, well, it doesn't go far enough. And while I agree with that, we also have to, like, if you came in with this broad brush to just, undo everything, that would definitely not even stand a chance. And so what you're trying to do is take parts of this and improve on parts of this to at least start having this discussion. Am I right?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, so I kind of agree in some ways with those responses. I mean, we ought to have a clear definition of what is a legal adult in Washington. And really, in an ideal world, I believe that is age 18. I think we ought to center all of our law, and it's not just healthcare issues, any issues, at one age. And I mean, I'm even open to the argument it should be 21 like it was decades ago, but 18 is a standard, and not a bad one. 17 is also a standard in various sections of federal and state law. Those sections recognize a 17-year-old as having some level of maturity, of legal, an element of legal adulthood. Now, it's not perfect, but the age 17 threshold is consistent with some other sections of law. So it has a good model, a good frame in the law. But I don't disagree. We could make it 18. But I think by making it 17, it is more an incremental step. Really what it does, whether it was 18 or 17 or even 16, I wanted to see a consistent age threshold. It's the patchwork of 13, 14, 15, whatever, that is really bad law. I mean, even for the healthcare providers, it's confusing. They're not exactly sure, depending on what kind of healthcare or mental health care service they're delivering, what the age is. And so they tend to err on the youngest side, which is not good law. It's not good public policy.
Right. Now, this bill would not, with the passage of Senate Bill 5599 in 2023, that allows children to access what Washington calls protected health care, which is abortion and so-called gender affirming care. This bill, because that's kind of a separate law, this bill doesn't touch that. Is that correct?
Not directly, but it does say that these services, these protected healthcare services, would still be subject at least to parental notification, and frankly, by my reading of it, their consent. That it would be in conflict with certain sections of 5599, and ultimately the courts would have to decide which would take precedent. It does not undo 5599, so I would say it modifies some elements of 5599, but it does not undo that set of law. It would be in conflict with it, and like I say, the courts would have to adjudicate which prevails. It's worth noting that this does continue, 1176 does continue what we started with Initiative 2081 last year, the Washington Parents' Bill of Rights. That initiative, now law, passed by the legislature into law, really focused on parental notification. It was not so much about consent being required as it was parents have to be told, have to be notified of a number of different types of therapies and treatments that their children, minor children, always minor children here, would be experiencing. And that separate reform, the Parents' Bill of Rights, has already been litigated. It was sued, the ACLU sued almost immediately to try to overturn it. And Washington State Court ruled, no, it's good law, the Parents' Bill of Rights. They did put a hold on a couple of elements in it, but left the law on the books and confirmed it is good law. There may be further litigation on a couple of fine points within it, but the Parents' Bill of Rights has been deemed good Washington law by Washington courts, which tend to be progressive. So I think that was a good test of whether this is good law or not. Now, the new bill, 1117, is not exactly the same. It extends the defense of parental rights and restoration of parental rights a little bit farther. Mm-hmm. It is not as focused on school activities as the Parents' Bill of Rights was. It is more focused on health care. There's some overlap between the two, but the Parents' Bill of Rights was primarily school-related things, and this is clearly health care in the healthcare space. So, but I believe there's enough of an overlap in the structure and the approach of the two reforms that the court's ruling that the Parents' Bill of Rights was good law is an indicator that this would also be good law in Washington State. We aren't changing the mature minor doctrine. We're leaving it in place. We're just moving the trigger threshold to that older age consistently across the doctrine.
Which would be huge. And like you said earlier, it's with how we got here with the mature minor doctrine was inch by inch over the last 2 decades. And the way we get out of it is also inch by inch. So it's baby stepping our way out of it.
Incrementalism. And, you have to be patient and it can be frustrating for sure. Right. But I think you unwind the problem the same way you wound up the problem, which is bit by bit. Yeah, if you go back and look at the history of it over that 20-year period or so, the way that the mature minor doctrine started, and I mean, we can talk plainly about it, its original focus was on abortion. That's where really it started. And the laws were put in place then to put this wedge between parents who might not agree with abortion and a young woman, really girl. I mean, these are minor. We're always talking about minor children here, who might be pregnant and seeking an abortion. It was a wedge. If the parents didn't believe in abortion or didn't agree with abortion, it was originally designed to allow that 13 or 14-year-old girl to get an abortion without parental consent. It then grew beyond just abortion, again, inch by inch, incrementally, in a number of expansions of that concept to apply to general health care, to apply, and this is what you and I've talked about a lot, to mental health care, which was not in the original concept. And I would say now, even though abortion will be the talking point and the so-called gender affirming care will be the talking point, I would say the biggest point of impact is neither of those things. It's mental health care. It's psychiatric care. That's where the mature minor doctrine really comes into most play for most families and most kids. A child can receive psychiatric care in Washington, including pharmacological care, pharmaceutical care, drug therapy, without parental consent. And this could be a kid is having trouble concentrating at school. A school counselor recommends that kids see a psychiatrist. That psychiatrist may be at a health clinic on the campus of the school, or maybe down the block or at a hospital. The kid sees the psychiatrist. The psychiatrist diagnoses the child as having ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, and recommends Ritalin or some other similar stimulant that can work for helping kids with ADHD. The kid gets on Ritalin, gets a prescription, gets it filled perhaps at the clinic on the school campus, and the parents are never consulted. And now the kid is taking Ritalin, and it has all the potential side effects that any drug therapy does. Yep. It works well for some people. It doesn't work well for other people. There are side effects. That's okay. That's all drug therapies have those matters, those issues. But the parents were never consulted. And the 13 or 14-year-old is now taking Ritalin, and the parents may find it in the backpack or something and say, what the heck is this?
Yeah, a huge piece that I think doesn't get talked about enough about these prescriptions that kids can get without parental consent is, let's say you've got this 13-year-old kid using your ADHD that they're getting from school, ADHD meds they're getting from school. Well, when I would take my kids to the pediatrician, I knew their medical history from the day they were born.
Right.
And the pediatrician would always, or whatever doctor we were seeing would always ask, a litany of questions about my child's medical history. Well, I guarantee you a 13-year-old kid has, when they get asked those questions, they have no clue. Ask my mom, ask my dad. And this is what they're taking out of the equation, which I believe is medically irresponsible.
Oh, without a doubt.
Cause great harm.
We're already beginning to see lawsuits over things like this. Now, the lawsuits have a lot to do with the so-called gender affirming care, but you're seeing other types of lawsuits already about this. And the misdiagnosis or the partial information. It's a huge liability risk that ultimately, if the healthcare is administered at a school-based health clinic, which a lot of people on the left love the idea of doing, putting these health clinics on school campuses, it creates a massive liability problem for the school district, which ultimately, of course, is a public entity. It ends up being a liability issue for all taxpayers.
Right.
Misdiagnose the kid because the kid doesn't know his own medical history in detail. Give them a drug that they react badly to. And if the parent or guardian or grandparent had been there, they could have said, well, wait a minute, he had a health problem when he was 3, and we don't like this drug for that reason. And, I'll go get you the proof, or you take my word for it. We don't want that. And that's missing from this. And I guess, Julie, we should talk too about how I said at the beginning, I think some of this is intentional. There is a left-wing, radical left ideology that all nuclear families are unhealthy. Right. You can read their books, their novels, their literature, their so-called science. It's usually pretty manipulated, that say that the nuclear family is inherently destructive of the youth, of young people. And that is not true. But what the left does is it tries to normalize pathologies. It does this across all kinds of different contexts. Normalize pathologies and say that all families are inherently abusive. All families will beat or cast out a teenage child who has depression or has gender dysphoria or whatever the issue may be. And then they latch on to a couple of stories where a family was abusive, and Lord knows there are abusive parents, there are abusive families, and they try to make that the baseline. They try to make that the normal. Well, that's standard. No, that's not standard.
Right.
Most parents and grandparents love their children. And if the child's struggling with depression, they want to help the kid get past the depression, or if it's chronic, manage the depression. And we know there are people who struggle with depression, with bipolar disorder. And if you do it right, you can live a perfectly healthy, happy life.
Yeah.
And are there kids who struggle with gender issues? Sure, there are. There always have been. But most parents and grandparents don't ostracize that child. They love the child. They want to help the child find whatever the life is that would make that child happy. But the left wants to say, if a child has a gender confusion issue, the parents will beat the child and throw the child out on the street. That just isn't true.
Right. Yep. It is intentional, and that's their narrative. That's how they try to sell this. So we would like this bill to have a hearing. And I know that with the Democrats in charge, that's next to impossible. We have already put out a call to action asking people to email their state representatives, asking to give this bill a hearing, at least let citizens speak about it and put in their 2 cents. What can people do if they want to try to influence this bill to move forward?
Well, just talk about it. I mean, we need to start to be braver about just talking about these issues. I mean, I do it for a living. You do it for a passion. But there are a lot of just ordinary people, working people, family people, middle-class people who are uncomfortable talking about these things.
Right.
They think it's too controversial. It'll pick a fight with somebody. They don't want to fight. They live their lives. At the end of the day, they want to listen to music and make dinner and watch TV, and they don't want to be involved in this stuff. And that's understandable. But I think it is important that we do engage more on these issues. This House Bill 1176 is a parental and family rights issue. It defends and restores healthy families, parental rights, grandparents' rights, families' rights. Now, it allows for extraordinary circumstances. I mean, it says right in the bill that in the case of an urgent medical condition that endangers a child's life, then yes, the mature minor doctrine can kick in. And specifically, I put wording in there around abortion because it is such a controversial issue.
Right.
That in a situation where a minor child's life is truly in danger by a health situation gone awry, she's hemorrhaging, something like that, that yes, we could allow the existing mature minor doctrine to have effect, and a healthcare provider acting in good faith could provide healthcare services without parental consent. But those are exceptional situations. Right. The standard would be parental consent must be gathered before healthcare services can be provided. So we don't need to hear people saying, well, this would make a young girl, die on the floor of the girls' bathroom. Right. No, that's not true. And it acknowledges those extraordinary needs. And I think it will make children have better health outcomes. So don't be afraid to talk about it. Your group, Conservative Ladies of Washington, already does a very good job of kind of the one-click statement making, and you can do that through the website run by the state legislature. It is, well, it's not as easy as it should be, but it's relatively easy, and you make it easier to say yes or no, I support this, I don't, or make a short statement of what you believe about it, and if you want, you can get in line to testify if there is a committee hearing on it. It's worth pointing out there is new leadership within the state legislature in Washington on the critical healthcare committees. Particularly in the state house, there is a new chair of the state health and wellness, the state house health and wellness committee, and his name's Bernowski. He's from Pierce County, and he is a first responder by training, a fireman, and I think he has some EMT type training in his background. So he's a relatively good person to talk about health and wellness issues. He is not, at least by reputation, a very far left guy. He's whatever passes for a moderate Democrat these days.
Right.
So I think he might be open to listening. So if you send in a comment, if you do request a hearing, I would hope that Rep Bernowski would listen and would give the bill a hearing. That doesn't guarantee it gets to the floor for a vote, but it's the first step, and certainly an important one to talk about this issue to restore and protect parental rights. And the important point to make is we want to improve health outcomes for kids. We want the suicide and suicidal thoughts, those instances, to go down. We want less of that.
Right.
We want the morbid obesity in 13 and 14-year-olds to go down. I mean, ironically, more families are struggling financially than ever, but the kids are in worse physical shape than ever.
Well, that's because Twinkies are cheaper than eggs.
That's right. That's right. That's very right. Now, we can't address that in this bill, but we can address parental involvement. And a last point to bring up that's worth talking about if you talk to people about this mature minor doctrine in the House Bill 1176 is parents are excluded. They're cut out of being involved in the child's health care. But under the current law and under the current doctrine, once the health care services have been rendered, those parents who were cut out of the process are still financially liable. They're financially on the hook.
I know.
Delivery of those services. So, we've heard stories from parents where they get a bill from a doctor.
Tens of thousands of dollars, I know.
And it's redacted. There are black blocks over the description of the services provided. So you have no idea what you're paying for, but the bottom isn't. The amount you owe is not redacted. You owe, let's say, $2,500 for something. And you're given no information about what it is you owe $2,500 for. And if you call up and say, okay, I got this bill, I don't know what this is, what do I owe $2,500 for? They will tell you by law, we can't tell you.
Yep.
And you say, but you can't tell me, but I'm responsible for this? Yes. It's just crazy. That's bad. It is crazy.
Yep. That is another great thing to talk about. Well, we're going to do everything we can to see if we can get this bill a hearing. I appreciate you always sticking up for parents and putting forward some really great bills. You've pre-filed some other good bills that we've got on our Legislative Action Center. So hopefully people can go there and check them out and buckle up. It's going to be a wild ride in 2025.
That is true. Part of the reason we're trying to get some of these bills pre-filed that deal with policy that's important, whether it's this or school choice or some of the drug policy stuff, is the focus of this coming legislation is going to be very much on money. It's going to be on budgets and taxes, tax policy. And we wanted to get a few of these sort of pure policy bills that deal with, everything deals with money eventually, but are not specifically about budgets. We wanted to get them out early so we could get people talking about them, because once the session starts, and that's coming up just next week, I think a lot of the focus and the media concentration is going to be on budgets and taxes. And we wanted to get a few of these issues that are about pure policy and law out in front. And surely, parental rights and healthy kids are a major, major important issue.
One of the things that Jim and I forgot to mention in our discussion, and we were talking about it after I hit stop on the recording, is that one of the things this bill does that really became an issue after COVID is that it would ensure that parents have a say in the vaccinations of their children. So currently, some schools in Washington state are giving out vaccines. And if we lift that minimum age up to 17, they will not be able to give those vaccines without parental consent, which is a huge issue on really any vaccine for your children, but especially with the COVID vaccine. So that's another point on this bill that is really one that is nonpartisan, and parents who are not really politically engaged or affiliated with any party, they want to have a say in the vaccines that their kids are getting. They want to be able to protect them if there's a reason that they shouldn't maybe get a vaccine. So another point that you can talk about in your circles with friends and people that you're talking about this bill with. Now, I want you to take action. We've got a really easy call to action on our Legislative Action Center. The message is pre-filled for you, and it will go directly to your legislator. You'll put in your address, and our program knows where to send it. You can, though, customize your email that you're going to send to your representative, which if you have the time and if you have some opinions about this, I would recommend doing that. Customize it, because giving your 2 cents on the matter is really more important than just some pre-filled email. So please do that. Take action. I've got the link in the description below. So please go do that now and go share this information with as many people as you can. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you again next time.